Today marks the first Jury Duty Appreciation Week in Canada. And if you're wondering why Canadians need a week to thank their jurors, or if you're thinking, isn't it your civic duty to be a juror? Consider this one former juror. Tina Danzer was juror number 1 in the Paul Bernardo murder trial. She and her fellow jurors were witness to some of the most horrific details in the very graphic case. This trial took place for more than 3 months in Ontario back in 1995. And in Ontario, employers are required to give people time off for jury duty, but the law does not require employers to pay an employee during that time. So what's compensation like for a juror who dedicates weeks to a trial? And what about mental health supports for being subject to horrific details day in and day out? Well, we're fortunate tonight to have joining us Tina Danzer. She is now the Chief Operating Officer for the Canadian Juries Commission. And the Commission's CEO, Mark Farrant, joins us as well. Thank you so much for being here. Tina, let's start with you for just a moment. Why exactly do we need this day now? And if you could tell us what progress has been made since you were a juror back in '95.
Well, I think it's needed, because people give up a lot to perform jury duty. They step away from their jobs, they step away from their life and their families. It's extremely stressful. Not everyone suffers trauma like I did from graphic evidence, but the trauma, there is a lot of stress in dealing with the fact that, your employer is not happy that you're gone from your job. Your coworkers are not happy that they have to pick up the slack. You're worried you could lose your job. How do you pay for this? In Ontario, it's $0 from day 1 to day 10. Then it's like $49 or $40 up until day 49. You got to pay for parking. What about daycare? What about elder care? There's a lot that is involved. And, there's a lot of stress that goes in along the trial. Deliberations is something that people are extremely stressed over, because no matter if you vote guilty or not guilty, you are affecting somebody's life.
It's a huge responsibility. It is.
It is. And just like an employee who likes to make a nice salary, you also appreciate it when your boss tells you you've been doing a great job. And so we feel that jurors really need to be thanked for the job that they do for their country. It does happen in some U.S. states. It's never happened here. So we have lobbied to make this happen. And, it is a good thing. It's important to thank people for doing this.
And this is why your organization now has brought forward Canadian Jury Appreciation Week. Tina, if you could clarify. So right now, you're a juror here in this province. You make about $40 a day. You said childcare is not covered, parking's not covered. They often put you up in a hotel when you're sequestered. What about mental health supports? That is something that changed thanks to Mark. But can you start with what was available back in 1995 for you? Nothing, from what I understand.
In my case, I was extremely lucky because Justice Lesage, the judge on the trial, he understood how much trauma that the jurors went through. And he actually requisitioned the court to provide counseling for us. I was diagnosed with PTSD afterwards, but I gladly accepted the counseling, and I just assumed that that's how it was for everybody until Mark reached out to me and said no. And we then, together with others, went to lobby the federal government for change.
As you point out, that was something available to you in 1995, but not to everyone, which brings us to Mark. So, Mark, if you could share with us that you actually sued the Ontario government because you suffered from PTSD after sitting as a foreman, and this brought about change.
Well, we're very fortunate that Ontario took leadership to introduce the juror support program in 2016, and we continued to lobby other provinces across the country to follow suit. And so British Columbia introduced a juror support program, Saskatchewan introduced a juror support program, and Newfoundland and Labrador have provided improved services and supports to jurors. But it's really a national conversation because there are many provinces that have no support at all for jurors who have done their civic duty. And as Tina said, Jury pay is the catalyst to improve diversity and representation on juries. If we're talking about systemic racism in the justice system and improving access to justice, it really begins with jury duty. How can we expect to have representation on juries and representation in court when people can't afford to pay or can't afford to attend because of low jury pay? And so juries will continue to be overrepresented by retirees and people working for large corporations.
You make a great point, because anyone who has been to jury duty, sat in on jury duty, which I have as a journalist, you go up and you're asked, will this cause you any undue hardship? And you say, well, my employer won't pay me. Well, I'd have to get a babysitter. I can't afford that. And then, sometimes you're dismissed, is what they say. You're dismissed, and they move on to someone else. And what happens, as you point out, that eliminates people who maybe live in neighborhoods that are low income. That eliminates people who are fairly, let's say, new to the country, but are a permanent resident. That eliminates a lot of people who provide a voice. Again, it's a jury of your peers, and that means all of our peers, as you point out. I want to ask you what you're looking for, because Mark and Tina, as you both know, Mark, several years ago, Attorney General Yasser Naqvi had commented on this, or his office at least, that it's not an income you're making as a juror, it's an honorarium. Do you want this to be an income?
No, we want it to be fair compensation for your time and for the ability to step away from home and step away from family to serve without incurring undue financial hardships. Because we've heard from jurors who, after the first month of a trial are doing okay out of pocket, but then suddenly in the second month are having to go into debt because they're supplementing their income on their line of credit. So the House of Commons Justice Committee in 2018 in their landmark report recommended $120 per day as the baseline. Even that recommendation is now out of date given the roaring inflation and price increases that we're seeing now. Quebec has the highest jury pay in the country at $160 a day. But other jurisdictions have gone well beyond to provide a measure of financial support to jurors. If we look to Australia, jury pay has been raised in all states of Australia well beyond $160 a day, upwards of $240 a day, because they understood that representation and diversity was an issue in Australia as it is in Canada.
This is such a great topic. I'm going to have to ask to keep your answers just short, only because of the time we have left in the show, because I have 3 more questions, but the one I want to ask you is, because we're in an election period here, why are we not hearing more about this, Tina? Why is this not a top ballot box issue, considering jury duty impacts everyone, or could?
Here's the thing. When Mark and I first testified at the House of Commons, it was full of MPs from every party, and everybody said, oh my God, I didn't know, I didn't know, I didn't know. And for years and years, jurors haven't talked about this, so nobody does know. So it has taken Mark and I and the commission to lobby, and people are starting to pay attention, and we hope to make it an issue.
And what is this secrecy law, and why does it need to change, if you can explain quickly, Tina?
So the Secrecy Act, it stops people from talking about the deliberations that happened during the trial. We are trying to change that only specifically so that you can talk to a mental health professional, because again, deliberations is one of the most stressful times of the trial, because you are deciding about someone's life, whether guilty or not guilty. Is it the accused or a victim's family? Someone is affected by your choice, and being able to talk about the stress it has caused you is important.
And Mark, finally, if we can just quickly end on this note. Right now, we're following the Jacob Hogarth trial. He has said he's not guilty against all charges. What are some of the jurors you think experiencing there? It's a sexual assault case. What support is available to them? Because you brought about that change, as you noted.
Well, there is support available to them post-trial in Ontario through the juror support program. So there are counseling sessions available to them and a 1-800 toll-free number. There is no support for them in trial at this time. It's important for them to recognize the important work that they do and look for self-care mechanisms and support on their own at this point. It's some of the work that we're doing in British Columbia, actually, to train BC sheriffs to provide support for jurors trial as part of the commission's work.
Mark, Tina, thank you so much. Obviously, we could talk a lot more about this. We'll have you back again. Such an important conversation. I think you taught a lot of people at home quite a bit tonight. So thank you both.
Thank you, Christina. Thanks.